How old are you today?
3.
And what is your name? And where do you live?
In Nebraska.
Who's your mommy?
Sonia.
Who's your daddy?
Daddy, Popo.
Who's your sister?
Cassie.
That was 8 years ago. Looking at Colton now, you would have never guessed that he almost died in 2003. His father, Todd, tells about Colton's near-death experience in the book, Heaven is for Real.
And he started throwing up into the toilet, you know, and at first we're like, okay, he's got the stomach flu, because the doctor said it was going around.
Colton's condition only got worse as days passed. His doctor discovered his appendix had burst, and infection was spreading in his body. Time was running out.
And we knew we were in bad shape when they said, well, you need to come out to the hallway. They separated us from everyone else, and then someone came to us and started talking to us that we got to have surgery on your kid.
It was tough. Seeing your boy be lifeless when he was a very vibrant child.
Now, I'm also a pastor, and one of the things that I have to do, and sometimes you get to do, but it's difficult to be beside the bedsides of people as they're breathing their last.
Oh.
And you can watch the telltale signs that they're slipping away.
You see they are.
And when I saw that in my son, his body's starting to shrivel, his skin color starting to change, his eyes getting back, and he's in his head and the circles around it. His mother and I, we were terrified.
Yeah.
And finally
I remember reading, she said, I think this is it.
Yeah. We quickly took him out of our little community hospital, took him to a regional medical center. They did a CAT scan, and I remember them taking us out in the hallway, you know, separating us from everyone else. And you know it's not going to be good news then.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting there in this hallway where no one's around. Here's my wife, and here's my son just laying in her arms.
Mm-hmm.
He's not even moving.
Yeah.
And tears are streaming down her face and mine.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden we realize how serious things are.
Yeah. You're at death's door.
They come to us, say he has to have emergency surgery, his appendix is ruptured, and hindsight's 20/20. The doctors think his appendix had probably been ruptured about 5 days at that point.
Wow.
And so when he went into that first surgery, I remember asking the surgeon, I think every parent, every loved one's grasping for hope. Is he going to be okay?
Yeah.
And the doctor said nothing.
And I went back to the pre-op room where we had left some stuff, and I was finally alone, shut the door, and I just broke down and I was mad at God. I just frustrated, fed up. And I remember telling him, I said, God, after all I've done for you, and now you're going to take my kid? This is how you treat your pastors?
And I was calling our prayer chain. I was calling anybody that would be on the other line to get Colton on the prayer chain because it was bad.
We were there in the waiting room for an hour and a half, maybe. Then I remember the nurse coming out. Is Colton's daddy out here? I'm like, yeah, well, Colton's in recovery, and he's screaming for you. And I'm sitting there with him. And I remember my son in that room then looking up at me and goes, Dad, do you know I almost died? And my first thought was, maybe he overheard the nurse say that, or maybe they thought he was under anesthesia, you know, and he wasn't. But it wasn't till 4 months after we got out of the hospital that we finally listened to our son.
And that's where I got to see heaven. No, Jesus and some angels came and flew me up to heaven.
And I said, so Colton, what did Jesus look like?
I knew that the first person I saw was Jesus. He was wearing white robes with a purple sash, and he just came down nicely and gracefully.
Well, Dad, Jesus has markers. Dad, Jesus has markers. I didn't know what he meant, so I finally asked the right question. Colton, where are Jesus' markers? And he drops his toys down, he stands up, and he just points, Dad, they were right here. He takes his fingers, points to the palms, then he bends over and touches the tops of his feet and looks up to me. That's where Jesus' markers were, Dad.
When I was in the throne room of God to start with, So I got to see what that looked like. I was upset because I didn't know it was happening. What God did is He used people or things that I liked to calm me down. From there on, I felt better.
Then one day we're traveling together, and he looks up at me and, Dad, you used to have a grandpa named Pop, didn't you? I'm like, yeah, he's really nice. Really? Yeah, you used to play with him as a kid and work with him on the farm and shoot stuff with him. And I'm like, yeah, how do you know that? Well, he told me.
A figure came up, and he was Pop. He asked me, are you Todd's son? I said yes. He said that he was his grandpa, so that's where I met him.
Yeah, Pop, I was very close to him. And he was my most significant male role model when I was a kid growing up. But he was killed in a car wreck before I turned 7.
And then he began to tell you about another young lady that you met. Who's that?
My sister.
Your sister, not the living sister. One that you didn't even know had existed, right? Who had been, she died in your mom's womb?
Yeah. We'd had a miscarriage in between Cassie and Colton. And I think a lot of ladies deal with miscarriage differently. For a lot of ladies, especially like for my wife, it was a private hurt. She doubted herself, she questioned herself. Did she do something wrong? Did she eat something wrong? And it was something that she didn't share with a lot of people. Only a very few close friends knew that she had gone through the pain of miscarriage.
And certainly never shared it with
well, how do you explain to a little 3-year-old that babies die in their mommy's tummies without just scaring them to death? They're just not really ready for that. Yeah. And he comes bouncing into the living room one day, walks up to his mom and says, Mom, I have 2 sisters. And she leans forward going, your cousin, your friend, what are you talking about? And he just looks right at her and says, you had a baby die in your tummy, didn't you, Mom? And all of a sudden, you know, she just gets real serious. Who told you that? Well, she told me that. She told me she died in your tummy.
He's talking to his sister.
Oh, yeah, his sister told him. He turns to walk away. Mom then explodes. You know, Colton Todd Burple, you get back here right now. You don't tell me something like that and walk away. And much, much more loud than that. And I remember Colton looking at me like, Dad, help. And I'm like, you are so on your own. And, because we're in shock. You know, you're like, and he tiptoes back to his mom this time. It's like, it's okay, Mom, it's okay. God adopted her. She's okay. And I remember her getting on her knees and putting her hands on his shoulders and looking him in the face and saying, you mean Jesus adopted her? And he just sits there, shakes his head, no, his dad did.
Yeah.
And then she asked him, well, what does she look like? Well, Mom, she looks a lot like Cassie, except she's got brown hair instead of blonde hair. Cassie's kind of blonde, and she's getting darker now. She's not quite as big as Cassie, but almost. But Mom, she just wouldn't stop hugging me. She just hugged me all the time. She just wouldn't quit hugging me because she was so happy that someone in her family was in heaven with her.
Oh.
And then he looks up at me and says, Dad, and I told her that when you get to heaven, you'll give her a hug because you always give your kids hugs.
Yes.
And by that time, I mean, the tears are just streaming down both of our faces. And Mom's like, well, what's her name? What's her name? And Colton's like, well, I don't remember, Dad. I don't remember, Mom. You never gave her a name. You see, my wife miscarried at 2 months along, so we didn't know if it was a boy or a girl.
Right.
And at that moment, if you'd asked us if we had dealt with that hurt, we would have probably told you we had, because we conceived Colton. We had the joy and pleasure of now raising our child, and we thought we'd moved on. But, boy, we had a hurt that was still there.
Yeah.
And, boy, God really touched us and gave us an incredible peace at that moment through our son.
You know, as we talked about heaven, and he was telling me all these wonderful details, I just felt like I had to ask him, did he want to come back?
I knew that I was leaving heaven because Jesus came to me and said, Colton, you need to go back. Even though I didn't want to go back, he said that he was answering my dad's prayer.
I remember that prayer. That irreverent, that disrespectful, screaming at God prayer. I was like, he's answering that prayer?
Today, Colton is a healthy 11-year-old and shares his heavenly journey with boldness.
I learned that heaven is for real, and you're going to like it.